So you'd think Disney wants as many people through the gates as possible. More visitors, more tickets, more revenue. Sounds pretty obvious. It isn't quite how the strategy works anymore. Here's the part almost nobody understands about this business right now. Disney has spent the last decade quietly redesigning ticket prices to do the opposite, not to maximize how many people show up, to control exactly who shows up and on which day. Most people think a theme park sells admission. It doesn't, not entirely anymore. What it actually sells is a controlled amount of crowding. That crowding is priced carefully enough to keep the experience worth paying more for. This single idea explains one of the most quietly aggressive pricing strategies in American entertainment. You will see how this began and the tension between what executives say internally and publicly. You will also see the real numbers from parks already testing it. This is not really a story about theme park tickets. It is a story about a company treating a vacation the exact same way an airline treats a seat. Stay with me, because two very different resorts are already living out two very different versions of this bet. The decade-old warning nobody took seriously. Back in 2015, a Disney Parks executive gave an interview that barely made headlines at the time. He said the company needed ways to spread attendance more evenly across the year. The parks, he explained, were at risk of bursting at the seams during peak periods. Simply raising prices across the board was not the answer he wanted. The goal instead was shaping which days people chose to visit. At the time, a single-day Disneyland ticket cost around $99. Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom charged roughly $105. 3 years later, in October 2018, the company acted on that idea. It introduced date-based pricing, where the same ticket cost more on a Saturday in July than a Tuesday in September. That was the first crack in decades of flat, predictable admission pricing. From calendar tiers to real-time surge pricing, here's the part that sounds backwards until you think it through. Date-based tiers were only the beginning. In late 2025, Disneyland Paris rolled out something closer to true dynamic pricing. Prices for the same calendar date could now shift based on weather forecasts and predicted crowd size. In one example from December 2025, a two-park ticket ranged between roughly $134 and $197. The final price depended entirely on demand signals that day. Once a guest picked a date, the price locked in for about an hour before resetting to reflect fresh demand. Guests who booked earlier in the day reportedly saw noticeably better rates than those who waited. Disney's chief financial officer, Hugh Johnston, has since confirmed something important. The company is investing heavily in bringing a similar system to the American parks. He said Paris had been running the model for about a year with strong results. He added that the company had not seen negative guest feedback so far. Internally, that success case is now the template for scaling the system to bigger, busier parks. Company materials have openly compared the approach to how airlines and rideshare apps already price seats and rides. The comparison is not an accident. It is close to the exact same yield management logic that keeps an airplane profitable with empty seats still on board. Rideshare apps use a version of it too, charging more the moment demand spikes on a rainy Friday night. A theme park, it turns out, can be priced the exact same way a flight or a car ride already is. The gap between the boardroom and the press release. Here's the trap hiding underneath this entire rollout. Executives have been fairly direct in interviews and investor calls about where this is headed. Johnson himself said guests likely will not see the system this year, but may see it in subsequent years. Public-facing statements have sometimes told a more cautious story. One company spokesperson told a major outlet the domestic parks had no immediate plans to change their current model. That statement came around the same time leadership was describing active, funded plans for a multi-year rollout to investors. Both statements can be technically true at once. A system can be years from launch while still being accurate. To call it not immediate, the gap between those two messages is exactly where public trust tends to erode. Families planning a trip years in advance are left guessing which version to believe. What the real numbers already show. Meet Tokyo Disney Resort, where the strategy is not a plan anymore. For the second half of 2026, one-day admission is reaching a record high under its own dynamic pricing system. At the same time, the resort's regular nighttime fireworks show has quietly disappeared from the schedule for an extended stretch. Analysts have linked that pause partly to reducing crowd density during peak evening hours. Back at Disneyland Paris, the real-world testing ground for the American rollout, price bands moved on a calmer schedule. That pace beat the sharp swings typical of airline fares. Guests could still see a range tied to a specific pricing tier before committing to a date. That structure gave families more predictability than a true minute-by-minute model. It still represented a real shift. The same date, the same ticket, could cost noticeably different amounts depending on conditions entirely outside the guest control. Executives have described the approach as a way to redistribute crowds rather than simply raise revenue. Cheaper days become more attractive. Expensive days quietly filter out some of the guests who might have overcrowded them anyway. The quiet second track, keeping the door open. Not every recent move points toward exclusivity. In January 2026, Disneyland introduced a discounted kids ticket. Children ages 3 to 9 could get in for as little as $50 a day. Executives have described moves like this as an effort to build the next generation of lifelong fans. At the very same time, other guest perks have quietly disappeared. Free Magic Bands, once a signature perk of any stay, are gone from most guests now. The free airport shuttle bus that once ferried Walt Disney World guests from Orlando is gone too. The strategy is not simply pricing everyone out evenly. It is closer to sorting guests into different tiers of access and cost at once. Wealthier or more flexible families absorb the premium pricing on in-demand days. Newer, price-sensitive families get an entry point on the calendar's quieter days instead. The real odds of running the math this way. In the optimistic scenario, dynamic pricing spreads attendance evenly across a calendar. Crowds shrink on the busiest days, and off-peak visitors get a real bargain. In the realistic scenario, the most desirable days simply become a luxury product few average families can still afford. The middle-class visitors who built the park's reputation get slowly priced toward the calendar's margins. Other major theme park operators are reportedly watching this experiment just as closely as Wall Street is. Disney did not build its parks business by keeping admission simple and flat forever. It built the next stage of that business by treating a ticket the exact same way an airline treats a seat.